What was the objective of the National Trust Act?
So, the National Trust Act, which was enacted in 1999, was enacted because a whole lot of parents, basically from Parivar, went to the government and said that the 95 Act does not really fulfill the needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It is an act of independent living, actually. It's about the main question that it asks is what happens to my child when I'm no more? So, how do we create support systems for children, for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and especially when the family size diminishes and the parents have grown old or they're no more, what happens? That's the big thing. So, in National Trust, we had among our registered organizations about 250 parents' associations. And every parents' association in different parts of the country had one ambition, and that was to create a kind of a small residential facility where their children will live once they're no more, and where other parents will look after all the children. There was a program called Samarth, and then we set up a program called Gharonda, and the idea was to support organizations to set up these residential. The learnings from the West are that we need to dismantle these institutions, and the people from disabilities need to come out into the community. So we're talking about deinstitutionalization in the West, and somewhere in our country we are creating these mini institutions.
How was BLISS created, and what are its core pillars?
Once I left National Trust, one of my dreams was to think of a solution again, a solution to these little mini institutions that were coming up. So I actually did a needs assessment with about 110 families. I came to Vidya Sagar and I sat down and called some of alumni, our students who had passed out from here and parents, and started talking to them about what their needs were. And everybody wanted some safe place for their child. Once they said, if one of us passes away, for both the parent and the child, or for only the so as they become older and things like that. One of the things I found was that parents were overprotective, and very difficult actually for parent, even the parent, the person, the adult with disabilities, actually for them to separate also, because they've lived together for 35, 40 years, but there's a big worry. From that needs assessment, a program was conceptualized which we call BLISS. BLISS stands for Begin to Live Interdependently with Support Systems. Now, as it is conceptualized, what I realized was we really had to create a whole ecosystem. And it kind of became 9 different pillars. So BLISS has 9 pillars. And it's really a work in progress. I look at it like an action-based research. What we are trying to do, some of it will work, some of it will not. But the idea is that people with disabilities should have the decision to decide where they want to live. And do they want to live with their own families, maybe when the parents are no more with their siblings? Or do they want to live in the community, in a group home? Or do they want to work somewhere and live in a working women's hostel? The choice should be there. And around them, we should be able to create the support systems they need. So that is the premise we work with. As I did the need assessment, many of the adults, though some of them had done vocational training, they somehow had lost their way, and they needed to kind of anchor themselves again to decide what do they want to do, in the years to come. And therefore, we went with this, path. It's a person-centered planning program. We got Keystone to come over and train us because to how to make a path. Path is planning alternatives for tomorrow with hope. That's what it stands for. So what you really do is you decide on what the dream the person has, and you build a kind of a path leading up to, you may not if the person's dream is to reach the moon, you may not be able to get there, but leading up to what they would like to do and into more kind of maybe into more, not very abstract, but very, very concrete plans, what you would do in the next, say, 5 years. So in these 5 years, so then what would I do in the next 2 years, in the next 1 year, in the next 6 months, in the next 3 months, in the next month, tomorrow, how should I start? So that's how the path builds up, right? So that's our first pillar. When an adult comes and a family comes, we start with this to help them think of where, what, how, and what do they want to live. Because most of them are just floundering. Families are floundering, they haven't thought of anything. Some of them know what their talents are, what they're good at, but many don't. And so they have to kind of still discover themselves. So that's the first one. Then the other thing which I realized was that workforce for adults is lacking in our country. We've somehow put all our energies into the 6 to, early intervention we've done quite a bit, but 6 to 18. But after 18 it's very blurred. Now the UN convention, UNCRPD talks about a personal attendant. But we just go ahead and say a caregiver and think it's the parent. So even when they do caregivers training, they actually want to train parents. But parents are going to grow old. Parents have a lifelong commitment to their child, but it cannot be at the same intensity, physically, emotionally. The person has to get on with other people. It could be friends, it could be siblings, it could be relatives, but they have to find a life outside that of the sphere of their parents. In National Trust, we call them Sahayogi, because Sahayogi is a person who supports you, a supporter. We have already started the caregivers training program. The Tamil Nadu government is certifying our course. So we find that the most important is workforce for people with disabilities. There are no job coaches in India. So even when a person with intellectual disability gets a job, the big issue is to sustain it, they need support for a fairly long time, 3 to 6 months. There are no independent travel trainers. We want other professions also to be trained. So that was the second pillar. The third pillar was reasonable accommodation. Now, under reasonable accommodation, the first thing I found that a lot of students, especially people with cerebral palsy or multiple disabilities who were on wheelchairs, even in their own homes, their whole home was not accessible to them. They couldn't reach the kitchen. If they could reach the kitchen, they couldn't reach the wash basin. If they wanted to cook, they couldn't reach the gas. Reasonable accommodation got divided into different parts, and one was TARA, Team for Accessibility Reasonable Accommodation, to make homes accessible or to make any space, offices accessible. And like we've done the kitchen accessible for people with disabilities.
Press is come down. The person will not take like this, no.
Yeah.
It's come down. We take the thing and put it again. It's go up.
Go up.
Vegetable cutting plate like this. This fully wheelchair height. We put potato, tomato like that. The person who not doing like this.
Yeah.
This one is the adapted tab, and one finger we use on and off. One finger.
So that the food does not
Come go outside.
Part of reasonable accommodation is 3-4 things: accessible homes, accessible transport, and also a kind of demonstration of all the assistive devices possible. So the accessible transport is public transport is not accessible. So how do people with intellectual and developmental disabilities actually reach their workplace? And that is why many of them are not working, or they start working and then they leave their jobs. So we set up Get Going, which is a kind of a model of accessible transport with two vehicles, which are used in the city of Chennai. Anybody can hire them, and lots of people are hiring them for their elderly parents, for some of them, for their children to go on to the hospital or to go for work or to go on a little holiday. But it's not enough. It needs to be upscaled a whole lot. So that is basically the reasonable accommodation. Then we had the maintenance therapy. Many of my students who had grown up and are now at home, that the private clinics where they went for therapy did not understand what is cerebral palsy. And they were giving them therapy as if they had had a stroke. So it was, and so, you get them to, the person who's never walked for 30 years is not going to walk. But you say, no, I'll make you walk. And they get so frustrated, they stop going for therapy. So actually, we need to develop maintenance therapy for long-term wheelchair users. There is not enough knowledge about that in this country. Because the long-term wheelchair users, there's a lot of problem with their feet, with their knees, with their ankles, where they need constant, good therapy every day. And that has not been emphasized by the therapists in India. So I'm talking about adults who maybe, once you're 20, and you're on a wheelchair, and for the next 40 years of your life or 50 years of your life, you're going to live on a wheelchair. What do you need to do to be, to be really fit all the time and to be able to live your life fully? Then we have the pillar is called TED-S, Trust Enabled Decision Making with Support Systems. Now the problem is every parent wants to make a trust. They have a little pot of money and they want to create a trust for their child. That's great. You create the trust. But in that trust, we want to put one more thing, and that is called the support circle. You see, the whole decision between supported decision making and substituted decision making is the whole question of guardianship and no guardianship. So people who want to go for the guardianship, well, the guardian will help you will make the decision for you. That's what the National Trust Act says. But a lot of people don't want a guardian, and they're talking about supported decision making. So you need a support circle. Now, when we started talking to parents about this trust and creating this support circle, and of course, even in my needs assessment, we realized that they actually had not created any kind of friends, allies, or people who will support their child after them. And it was always even the person with disabilities will say, it's my mother who I go to for everything, or my mother and father. But it wasn't a whole lot of people. It was not like non-disabled people who, we learn how to create our support systems very naturally. Wherever we go, we shift house, in the new place we create a support system. But our children with disabilities have no support system. So we have now started TED-S after working with 32 families and realizing that we cannot do it, trying to create this support circle through just encouragement, motivation is not going to happen. So now we're starting with actually in Vidya Sagar with our children from early intervention and from reception class when they join school, 6-year-olds. What we are telling families is that we need to work also in the neighborhood. We need to do, first of all, a resource mapping of the neighborhood. By resource mapping, I mean all the places that the person, as she grows, would like to visit. So in the neighborhood, it could be the next apartment building where she wants to have friends, or there are other people her own age. It could be a little coffee shop. It could be a little library. It could be anything else. It could be a Montessori school. But to create a resource, where are the places this person would like to meet? And who are the people who will become part of this support circle? Is over this, starting at 6 years or 5 years, going up to 18 years, can we create that support circle? It could be siblings. It could be siblings' friends. It could be neighbors who become very close. It could be cousins. It could be anybody. Or it could be pals which come out of the community. Like in Delhi, there was a girl whose support system was the lady who ironed outside her house. So any time there was a problem, or she was not well, or once she never came out for 3 days, and that lady went and told the neighbors that I don't know what's wrong. She hasn't come out for 3 days. So the neighbors then went to see what the problem was, and she was not well, and she lived alone with a single parent. So the support system can be anybody. It could be the shop you go to eat your dosa. It could be the person who serves you, who learns to see how do you speak, how do you communicate, and become your support person. So of course, the support person on a long-term scale we'll have to figure out and work out. But we start with the neighborhood. We start by creating this environment of inclusion, environment of creating a support circle. So that is TEDS. So these are the 4-5 pillars that we worked on till now.
What are your future focus areas?
The pillars we are hoping to work on is setting up group homes, which we call the Swayam, is setting up, we have one pillar called peer counselors. Because I found that in spinal cord injury center, are people who've had an accident and have lost their mobility. They do this 3-month course on peer counseling and they become excellent counselors for another person who's had. So I want to explore peer counseling. So that's one of my pillars. And the last pillar, the most important, is the pillar called leisure. It all started with my son because he had very high support needs. He could neither be an academic stream nor could he do a vocational training because he was profoundly disabled. We had a lot of students we took in who actually could not be part of the academic stream or the vocational stream. So we created, but they needed therapy. They needed to have physiotherapy, speech therapy. They needed to have a lot of activities which make life more joyful for them. And as they grew older, we called the group called the Adult Leisure Program. And so these kids just about do what they want. So they listen to music, they go out on a trip, they love, some of them love, like my son used to love to travel, they go to the beach, or they might want to do some pottery or some painting, or you want to just dance or some kinesthetic, anything, Zumba. So it is a place where people with disabilities, because some of these resources are not easily available to them. So sports, a lot of people with disabilities want to do sports, but it's not accessible. So how can we make it accessible? So the leisure one is a big one. And I'm hoping that we can create some facilities which become model for the rest of the country.